are the New York Knicks. We are the New York Knicks. Say go New York, go New York, go. Go New York, go New York, go. Say go New York, go New York, go. Go New York, go New York, go.
Welcome, Knicks fans far and wide to episode number 2 of the Knicks Pod. I'm your co-host Josh Byrne, the New York sports fan, and I'm joined as always by my good friend, longtime fellow New York Knicks fan, Connor Thompson. So it's been a few quiet days here for the New York Knicks in this offseason. Of course, they made waves. They made huge headlines the other day when they traded away 25-year-old power forward, and I think I can say fan favorite Obi Toppin to the Indiana Pacers for 2 second-round picks. And on that same day, just a few hours later, while we're digesting the Toppin news, Leon Rose goes out and he inks Donte DiVincenzo to a 4-year, $50 million contract, and that brings up a few questions. We've had a few days to digest all that news. Where do the Knicks go from here? Where does New York go to fill the holes following the Obi Toppin trade? And is Donte DiVincenzo just the main course for this offseason, or is there more to come, more significant additions to be made? We'll be talking about Jacob Toppin coming in, Obi's younger brother. Can he be a suitable replacement for Obi? Jalen Martin coming over, the 19-year-old guard. What can he bring to the table? And why is Evan Fournier still on this Knicks roster? This is a guy who was pretty much excommunicated, banished to the freaking trenches last year, got no playing time. But hey, you look at Spotrac, you look at the contractual finances of this New York Knicks team, and Evan Fournier's right there with $18 million set for him to earn next season. So what did the Knicks do with him? Immanuel Quickley, he's trying to get that kind of Evan Fournier money or even more, because a rumor is circling around social media now saying that Immanuel Quickley is now seeking not just an extension, but perhaps a triple-digit, a nine-figure triple-digit in the millions extension. Should the Knicks do that? Is IQ crazy for asking for that? We'll get into that. And finally, the results from the Knicks-Clippers trade, the details from that transaction that ultimately fell through, they were revealed recently. We'll talk about whether the Knicks front office was smart or not in declining that trade with LA. As I mentioned before, I'm Josh Byrne. I'm joined alongside by Connor Thompson. And Connor, with Obi Toppin leaving, how do you feel that Jacob Toppin's going to come in and replace his older brother on this team?
Hey Josh, thank you. And so I actually had a good chance to see Obi's younger brother, Jacob Toppin. When I was a freshman, I went to URI, and Jacob Toppin was actually a freshman with me. He was a good player on our basketball team. He wasn't a starter. He only started 3 games in the season, but he averaged around 18 minutes a game. So he's playing solid minutes every game. And just like straight away, you look at him, he wasn't a great shooter. He was not a playmaker at all. He could not assist. But he has some tools. He can get some rebounds. And, I mean, obviously, just like Obi, he is freaking athletic, man. You throw him a oop, he's going to throw down a windmill. He'll do crazy dunks. He'll get the crowd going. And honestly, that could be a great replacement for someone like Obi, because Obi, that's what he brought to New York. He brought the energy. He brought everyone on their feet. He did flashy dunks. And I think Jacob Toppin has the potential to do that, but I just don't think he is quite there yet, because he's undrafted, first of all, so he's not a big name prospect, and he still is just super raw. I mean, he's got the size, he's 6'9", he's super athletic like we said, but he's not a great defender, not a great playmaker, and really, I mean, the shooting's not there yet. His form is inconsistent. He shoots around 30% in the last season he had in Kentucky, but just overall, he just hasn't proved himself yet, because when he was at Kentucky, he only played 3 seasons for them, but he only started 1 major season. The first 2 years at Kentucky were just like URI. He was sitting on the bench, but I mean, he was still playing. He was still getting his 18 minutes a game, but his career stats were basically the same until he had a senior year. And I mean, he still has a lot to prove. I think he could be talented. I wish we could see him in the summer league, but unfortunately he's out due to an injury. But yeah, I'm really excited for him, and who knows? I mean, with injuries nowadays, and if he plays well in the G League, I really think he could make it on our roster. But what do you think about Jacob Toppin, or Jalen Martin for that matter?
Yeah, I'll start off with Jacob Toppin, man. I think the fact that you got to see him is really cool. You bring that level of insight that most people don't have because, frankly, and I think I can speak for most Knicks fans, we haven't really seen Jacob Toppin play. We know his name, we know what his brother did, and doing some research on his player profile, the number one thing that I took away from it is essentially he is the same kind of player as Obi Toppin. If Jacob Toppin fulfills his potential, he will be a guy who can score off the perimeter as a big four. He will be a guy that will show off routine athleticism like you mentioned and show off those crazy emphatic dunks. However, he has a lot of the same downsides that his older brother did when he came out of college. And the difference between those two players isn't necessarily their play style. It's their path here, their path to the NBA, how they got here, and how they're ultimately viewed because of that. Because when you look at Obi Toppin, this is a guy we're talking about who is a blue chip prospect. You know, he was a lottery pick. He was picked within the top 10, which makes it just so alarming that just 3 years later they ship him off for 2 second-round picks. But besides that, I mean, you look at Obi Toppin, this is a guy who won Player of the Year at Dayton. He was putting up ridiculous numbers there. And for Jacob Toppin, while he did have a noticeable, increase in his overall production his last year at Kentucky, I think a lot of scouts and a lot of people around college basketball were somewhat underwhelmed with what he put out because he didn't quite make that next step, take that next step that people around him thought he'd be able to do, especially because this is a guy who, his first 3 years at college, URI, and then as you mentioned, University of Kentucky for 2 straight years, he's averaging about 17, 18 minutes a game. His final season at Kentucky, though, it shoots up to 31.5. He gets his points per game up to 12.4. He's taken more threes, something that Kentucky had largely discouraged him from doing after he would take threes at URI. Well, last year he started taking some threes again, and he hit it, at a 30.5 clip, but this is also a guy who was taking 5 times the amount of threes that he was in the year before. So I think for him to profile as not just an NBA talent, but a productive NBA talent, you'd like to see him become a more consistent shooter. You'd like to see him improve on defense, much like people were saying about Obi Toppin when he came into the league. And you just like for him to refine his skills all around. Because when Obi came into the league, everyone thought of him as a uber talented yet somewhat raw prospect. And I think the talent is still there with his little brother Jacob Toppin, but I think he's even a little more raw and a little more unproven at the age of 23 compared to where Obi Toppin was when he was 23.
Yeah, looking back on it, Obi coming out of college was the clear-cut better prospect. I mean, when you look at it, Dayton was 29-2 overall. They were the 3rd best team in the country, and they didn't have a chance to compete in the tournament because that was the season where COVID happened and there was no NCAA tournament at all. So we never really got a chance to see what that Dayton team could have even done. But then you look at it, Obi Toppin was leading that Dayton team. He was averaging 17.1 points a game, 6.6 rebounds, 2 assists, and he was shooting really good numbers too. He was averaging 41.7 from beyond the arc. He averaged 64% from field goal, and his free throw numbers were 70%. When you look at Jacob Toppin's free throw numbers, his are only like 63%. So just coming out of college, right away, Obi was the clear-cut better prospect, and that's why he went number 8 overall. And that's why Jacob Toppin, unfortunately, is not drafted.
Yeah, and you just brought up his free throw percentage, Jacob Toppin, that is. And looking at this scouting report via our guys at NBADraftRoom.com, one of the comments is that Jacob will have to space the floor and hit the 3 ball at a better clip to make it in the league. He'll also have to improve, like you said, from the free throw line. He only hit 64% from the line as a senior, and he only hit 30.5% from beyond the arc as a senior. Certainly not where Obi was in those percentiles when he was a senior at Dayton. So, Jacob Toppin, it's a little exciting seeing Obi's brother come over, but I don't think anybody in their right mind has the same expectations for Jacob Toppin this year as what we were going to have had for Obi had he still been on this Knicks roster. And that leads me into another guy that could potentially step up and replace Obi Toppin on this roster, and that's none other than the one signee over the past few days for the Knicks, Jalen Martin. This guy, 19 years old, literally born in 2004, so he's a baby. He's well younger than both me and you, Connor, which is pretty crazy to think about. He's 6'6", 205, according to NBAScoutingLive.com, because frankly, I had never seen Jalen Martin play, and I don't think you have either. He excels at scoring on off-ball motion plays. He's a decent rebounder, decent defender, and overall a solid athlete. Now, what he does struggle at is his shooting. He needs to improve his playmaking skills as well. He can struggle to guard quicker players, and he's a relative unknown commodity. This is a guy who played last season in the Overtime Elite League, and while he played well in the G League Elite Camp, he's currently a guy who was projected to be a borderline second-round pick, didn't wind up getting drafted, and was scooped up by the New York Knicks and will be participating perhaps somewhere down the line this summer. And if not, I'd imagine he'd just go straight to the G League if they even kept him and signed him for the whole year. So, I feel like I have an idea of what you're going to say here, but what are your thoughts on Jalen Martin? And do you actually think he has a shot of making any sort of professional NBA impact at this juncture sometime this season?
Like you said, I actually don't know too much about Jalen Martin as well because I'm more of a college basketball fan, so I follow the actual NCAA. And the Overtime Elite League, it's a new league, so there's really they kind of have a bunch of young prospects. And, overall, they're giving players a shot, so I really enjoy it. And you've seen, those Thompson twins recently. They just came in from that league, so good talent can come from that. And who knows, maybe that's Jalen Martin. But yeah, looking at his scouting report, needs to improve his shooting, needs to improve his playmaking. Looking at his size too, 6'6", 205, he's not going to be one that's, driving in the paint, bodying someone. He's going to have to look for a jump shot, for dribble moves to create his own shot. So if that's something that he can improve on, then who knows, he really could make a splash in the NBA, and he could make this Knicks roster. But then again, he's only 19 years old, so anything could happen, and who knows? I'm just excited to see him play in the Summer League. That's when we'll really find out more about Jalen Martin.
I agree. The Summer League is the time to watch a guy like Jalen Martin. He is the epitome of what Summer League basketball is about. It's for guys that, for one reason or the other, regardless of how much hype they have coming into the league, they're relatively unknown, or maybe they're just young players in the league. But for Jalen Martin, he's pretty well unknown, and he is super young at the age of 19 years old. So the athletic ability's there. The Knicks signed him for a reason, I'm sure. So wouldn't it be quite the story if we see Jalen Martin pop off this year in the summer for the Knicks? I know the Knicks don't have too many interesting names going. It's not like they're the Oklahoma City Thunder with the Summer League team. But Jalen Martin is a name. If you're going to watch Summer League basketball and you're a Knicks fan, Jalen Martin is certainly a name to keep your eye on. But I think we can both agree, Connor, correct me if I'm wrong, we can both agree that Jalen Martin's not really a guy that's going to be expected to come in and have a real role on this Knicks team. He's certainly not going to be a guy that's expected to take up the roster spot of Obi Toppin. We mentioned Jacob Toppin a little bit, but who are some veteran guys out on the market that you could see as a potential fit with the Knicks to sign and plug in as the backup power forward?
Yeah, so I agree with you 100%. These rookies that we have, they're nice pieces, but realistically, they're probably not going to make the roster, at least see minutes in Tom's rotation. But I think in order for the Knicks this offseason, I think what they have to do is target someone like a veteran, maybe Jermichael Green. You get him on a cheaper deal. He's not going to be anything special for us, but he'll definitely help out and fill a void with Obi Toppin being gone. And also, we can maybe even go after a player like Bol and give him a shot. He has loads of potential. So, there's a lot of guys, but I'm still not set on who the Knicks should plug in. What do you think, Josh?
Yeah, so all those guys are intriguing options. I think they all have their own strengths and weaknesses. Jermichael Green, you look at him, and the main way he can replenish the depth on this Knicks team, the main way he can make up for the loss of Obi Toppin is the fact that Jermichael Green brings a talent level where he's a big guy who can hit big shots on the perimeter, much like Obi Toppin can. I think offensively, one of Obi's biggest strengths here, almost to a fault, almost to a detriment, admittedly so at times, was that he would not be afraid to take the open three. And for a guy who's a pretty big player, he's playing the four, I think he was an above-average shooter for the Knicks, and I certainly know based on the pedigree, based on the resume of JaMychal Green, a guy who has been through the ringer, a guy who has been at the NBA level a lot longer than Obi Toppin has, he's made a name for himself as making his money based on hitting threes, being that big body who can come in and also shoot at a respectable level. Now, don't get me wrong. This isn't to say that JaMychal Green is a guy who's going to come in and score 15 to 20 points a game. He's only averaging 7.7 for his career, but this is also a guy that comes in and he makes 37% of his threes through his career. He'll play 15 minutes a game. He'll put up a couple shots. He might make one or two. And outside of that, that's where things get pretty negative with him. As much as I like JaMychal Green for what I just said, his shooting can be really good for a big. The downside of him is that, like Obi Toppin, he can struggle on defense at times. And one of the most annoying things to me about this Obi Toppin trade was that Obi Toppin's weakness from the jump was his defense, right? I think we can all agree on that. But I thought there was a noticeable improvement over the past year in that department for him. And with a guy like Obi who's 25 or 26, it's not hard to foresee how he could become at least an average defender in the NBA, and I felt like he was already well on the way to doing so. With a guy like JaMychal Green, who is already known to be below average defensively and is now on the wrong side of 30, you kind of know what you're going to get, and that's pretty much a mediocre to slightly below average player in most aspects of the game outside of shooting the three ball. So JaMychal Green is by no means the worst replacement. He is a somewhat suitable option, and he can provide solid shooting, which the Knicks could always use more of. Defensively speaking, I just think he's just going to be a traffic cone out there, albeit a bigger one, but it's not like this guy's an elite rim protector. It's not like he can really guard many different positions. You're really just going to hope that he can come in and play respectable defense versus the other team's 4 or 5, maybe just the 4. And also, you better hope with his defense or lack thereof that he's coming in and hitting a couple threes and maybe getting hot. But I certainly wouldn't pay JaMychal Green over like $10, $11 million per season. I don't know how you feel about that. Between JaMychal Green, Grant Williams, and Bol Bol, like you said, what's your preference between those three, considering their personal strengths and weaknesses and how they would fit in the wake of the Obi Toppin trade?
Honestly, it's going to be a little bit of a hot take, but I want Bol Bol because he's going to be the cheapest player we could get because he's still not proven. He hasn't really scratched the surface yet. I mean, the Magic gave him a little run last season, but he didn't have a full chance to prove himself. And I'm not saying he'll get that in New York, but he's someone that's like, he's 7'2". He could shoot threes. He could block shots. Yeah, he's a little frail. Like, he's injury prone. There's a lot of worries with him, but I mean, you could get him for very cheap. Like, you're thinking JaMychal Green would cost $12 million. We could get Bol Bol for half of that. If we could probably get him for less, to be honest. So I think that would help us. We save some money, and we get a talented player that is still very young and has a lot to prove. And then overall, it kind of fits the system, because if we're looking for a defender, that's going to be Bol Bol.
I think one of the interesting things with Bol Bol is that he came into the league, there was a fair amount of hype. He had a fair amount of notoriety to his name. And I don't know if surprised is exactly the accurate reaction of seeing that news unfold, but it was noteworthy, and it was kind of jarring to see a guy who's only been in the league a few years and has shown glimpses of like that just let go for absolutely nothing. I mean, the Magic are not gaining anything except for the fact that they're getting his contract and they're getting his presence off of their roster, off of their books. So for them, I think it's a curious decision. But for the Knicks, I think, Bol Bol is a guy that they seriously got to consider. I'm right there with you.
Are you going to be able to get Quickley? And also, should the Knicks even consider giving Quickley that much? I don't know.
Yeah, Immanuel Quickley has been rumored to have been seeking this 9-figure extension for a while now, dating back to the middle of last season. Do I blame him? Absolutely not. I mean, this is a guy who could have very well been the 6th man of the year last season, so the fact that he demands a lot for his own personal value isn't necessarily surprising. You see what other players in the NBA are getting, and $20 million these days is not what it was even 5 or 10 years ago. So the fact that he wants 9 figures, yeah, it may sound crazy, but that's just $100 million, and just $100 million. Well, yeah, for NBA players, it is just $100 million. They're dishing out double-digit figures in millions to everyone. As long as you're a decent role player in the NBA these days, that's really all it takes to be eligible for one of those contracts where you're making $11, $12 million a year. I mean, the Knicks just brought in Donte DiVincenzo. No disrespect to Donte DiVincenzo, but let's not pretend that he is not something that he isn't actually I can't speak right now, but let's not pretend Donte DiVincenzo isn't Donte DiVincenzo. He's a role player, man. He came here to be a role player, and he's a solid role player who can hit big threes, but he came here on $12.5 million. Immanuel Quickley, he's a little bit above that. He's a little bit above where Donte DiVincenzo is. Donte DiVincenzo is a solid role player. Immanuel Quickley is a guy who could be a 6th man of the year, and on a lot of other teams, perhaps, he could even be a starter. And you saw when Jalen Brunson was out, Quickley did an admirable job of filling in. I'll never forget the game that he single-handedly won for the Knicks against the Celtics last year. That was one of the most magical moments of the season.
You could have missed that night, man.
Yeah, I know. You couldn't. He was must-see television, and that's the great thing about Quickley. That's why he's so special, and he has the ability to be more than a role player, and why he's asking for all that money is because when Immanuel Quickley is on, dude, yeah, he's super fire. He can take over an offense and carry you for an entire quarter, for an entire half. I mean, when he gets his floater going, combined with his nights where he's knocking down the open three, he's extremely difficult to defend. And speaking of the defensive side, he is a rare player in that he is undersized. No one's disputing that. The guy looks like a little Pringle out there on the court. But he doesn't play defense like it. I mean, he stay attached to his guy no matter who it is. And you'll be very hard-pressed to find another player in the NBA that plays harder defense than Immanuel Quickley. And the advanced metrics back it up. They really do. He was rated time and time again as one of, if not the most effective defenders with the lowest shooting percentage against in the entire NBA. And even when he was struggling in the playoffs with his shooting, it did not affect his defense. And that's why I think, regardless of whether I feel like he's worth $100 million or you feel like he's worth $100 million, I feel really good about the likelihood that he'll re-sign with the Knicks because he, again, is a Tom Thibodeau kind of player. Tom Thibodeau likes defense. Immanuel Quickley, given his size, plays as good of a defense as you'll find in the NBA, and I have massive respect for him. On one hand, though, if we're talking about why I personally believe he may not be worth it, it's just that he's incredibly inconsistent at times offensively. Yeah. This past season was his first season that he shot over 40% as a field goal percentage. That's a little alarming too. I'd like to see him be a little more consistent. Granted, he did improve his shooting percentage. It got up to near 45% this past season, which was nice to see. But when he goes cold, man, it would be nice to see if he could just do a better job of distributing the ball and being a more conventional playmaking point guard rather than the guy who, honestly, and it might sound disrespectful, looks like he's just chucking up shots at times. Because when IQ's at his worst, he's just dribbling the ball down the court and chucking up threes and trying to shoot himself out of it. And this Knicks team has too much depth to afford a guy who's going to crash and sink them so much when he's having his own personal struggles. That's something that I think IQ can improve on and develop from. But if we're talking about the player he is right now, that would be his main weakness. So for me, I think overall I'd say yes, but it wouldn't absolutely devastate me if the Knicks didn't bring back Immanuel Quickley. Does that make any sense to you at all?
No, it does because, I mean, dude, honestly, when you look at it, yeah, $100 million is $100 million now. Quickley is definitely worth that. Like, he is going to be worth that because, I mean, he's the best perimeter defender on our team. I'll say it confidently. He is.
I agree with that.
He is. Mm-hmm. And for his size, I mean, he's not tall or anything, but he'll still give you like 4 rebounds a game, if not more. Like, he could scrap down low, get rebounds. He could guard basically 1 through 3. So very versatile in that aspect. And yeah, at times when he's on, bro, he is one of the most exciting players in the league to watch, and he'll hit his shots. But then again, we've also seen it, especially in the playoffs. That was a little, I mean, in the playoffs, man, he shot 24% from 3-point range. And looking back on it, man, we could have used some of those because that was a problem with the Knicks. We shot ourselves in the foot, just kept trying to shoot threes, but damn, it would have been nice if Immanuel Quickley had even shot 33%. I would have taken that. But, I mean, I honestly don't want to lose Immanuel Quickley. I think we drafted him. He's one of our own. I want to keep players like that. So I want to find a way where we can get Quickley. It might not be $100 million because we're going to have to, see the financial situation of the team and everything. But he definitely does deserve a lot of money, and I think the Knicks should pay him. I really do. But if they do let him walk, I wouldn't be too upset because we do have someone like Quentin Grimes that could kind of be a replacement and step up.
Yeah, certainly. I mean, I guess you could say they don't play the same exact position because Quickley, even though, you can put him at shooting guard, I think coming out of college, he was kind of thought of as a point guard. It doesn't really matter as much now, but Quentin Grimes is more just like that shooting guard, maybe even small forward kind of guy. And he's really good, too, with his shooting and his defense. They're kind of similar players in that sense. And Quentin Grimes wouldn't be the worst replacement in the world, but I'm with you right there. The big thing for me that you said is Quickley is a homegrown talent. He's a guy who got drafted here. And how often are the Knicks extending guys that they draft? I mean, R.J. Barrett's a unicorn in that sense.
Wait, actually, Josh, I want to bring something up right when you said that. The first time we've signed a player that we've drafted, gave him a contract extension, was Mitchell Robinson, dude. Mitchell Robinson. That was like 2 years ago. So, yeah.
and that's been one of the biggest reasons to me of this turnaround for the Knicks in these past few years, why they've become, not a championship caliber team yet, but a team that will most likely be viable to be in a playoff position year in, year out. It's because they've actually drafted very well. You may not remember because they haven't drafted anybody in the past couple of years, but the Knicks, in recent memory, in their most recent 3 drafts, you've gotten the guys like Immanuel Quickley. You've gotten the guys like Quentin Grimes, like Deuce McBride. You've gotten R.J. Barrett in 2019. Say what you want. He's become a solid player, good enough to get the max extension. And as you mentioned, Mitchell Robinson shortly before them. I think real Knicks fans remember the time when Mitchell Robinson was the best player on this team. I mean, they were really bad at, 2018-19, and Mitch was like one of the main reasons to watch. And now, Mitch, it's not like he's an afterthought, but he's certainly far down on the list when you're ranking the most exciting players on this team. And that's no disrespect to him, but they've come a long way in assembling a lineup of homegrown drafted talent by this front office. So it's nice to see. But let's not end the parade at Mitchell Robinson getting an extension and R.J. Barrett getting an extension. I'm with you. For his weaknesses and for the things that I believe Quickley has to improve on to become a more NBA player, all those things aside and in consideration, I still believe the New York Knicks should give him an extension, and if it's about $100 to $110 million over 4 years, I wouldn't be against it. Now, this leads into the big question, though, and one of the elephants in the room on this Knicks roster, and that's how are they going to afford to do that if they're also going to perhaps sign another 1 to 2 legitimate veteran free agents? How are they going to do that? I think one of the big answers potentially for that is Evan Fournier. Mm-hmm. What is Evan Fournier doing on this roster? What is his role on this team?
Stealing money, that's what it is.
Exactly. And this is a situation which I think the Knicks want to do right by their veteran player. I think there's a lot of respect in that Knicks clubhouse, in that Knicks locker room, in MSG, in the front office for Evan Fournier and what he's done in his career, and even what he's done as a Knick. Now, Knicks fans may scoff when they hear that, and they may really dislike Evan Fournier, and I get it. He's been disappointing while he's been here. But this is a guy who, perhaps behind the scenes, he's had a positive impact with the team. And to be fair, on Evan Fournier's account, he was a pretty solid player before coming to the Knicks. He was a guy who'd score 18 points a night. He put up solid shooting numbers. He had widespread respect around the league. And he's not far removed from that. He had a so-so season in 21-22. And then last season, he essentially plays the first 2 weeks of the year and gets booted, gets eviscerated, just gets eradicated from the lineup whatsoever in exchange for Quentin Grimes. Now, I'm not going to argue that decision in hindsight. I think it was definitely the right decision to replace Quentin Grimes with Evan Fournier and essentially give Grimes Fournier's minutes. But now the Knicks have to take action. You can't just let this veteran making $18 million rot on the bench, because I don't see a situation in which Tom Thibodeau is just going to change his mind and all of a sudden start playing Evan Fournier. So while it might not be a sexy package you get in return, I think the Knicks and Leon Rose need to do everything that they possibly can to get rid of some of that contract.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, Evan's got to go. There's no question about it. And the Knicks want to do him right. Like you said, they don't want to just kick him out. Like, they're trying to get him somewhere where he might play, where he might have a chance to have a second career here now that he's 30. And, I mean, Evan just, you look at him, he can't guard anyone. He's not a great defender. The only thing he really brings is three-point shooting. And are you going to pay someone $18 million a year to shoot threes for you? You can, but you could also get someone for much cheaper. So that's obviously the problem right now. That's why Evan is not off this team, because if his contract wasn't $18 million, he'd be out of here. But that's what it is, and I just think the Knicks, they're just going to have to, they're going to have to dump him off. They probably will have to eat some of the contract and just get back maybe a pick. Who knows? I really just don't see them getting anything, but I agree with you. They have to do something, because Evan Fournier, I don't want him eating up a roster spot at the start of the season when he's just simply not going to be there and playing.
Exactly. I'd rather have, some sort of underwhelming, mediocre talent on the team that I know is actually going to have a role, is going to have a designated job to do at certain points of the game, versus Evan Fournier, who isn't necessarily terrible, but he's not good, and he ain't going to be doing anything on this team. I think a likely situation is what you mentioned, where the Knicks have to eat some of his contract. One of the most realistic places, just generally speaking, is any rebuilding team. Teams that generally have more cap space available to them, they, to me, would be a more viable destination for Evan Fournier, because contending teams aren't going to have the money and the roster spot for Evan Fournier. He belongs in a place that is rebuilding, where he can be a veteran leader and play every day. And I think he would thrive in that situation. Maybe you can send him to Houston. I don't know. I feel like there is some team out there that would give up something to take on some of Evan Fournier's contract. And if you get something like a veteran, 4 or 5 from that team, he may not be a very talented player or have much of an NBA resume. But if you get that in return, fine. That's something. If you get a second round pick or two in 2028, fine. That's something. Anything at this point would be a massive victory for the Knicks if they can get it in return for Evan Fournier, who is he's a stone. He's just a big rock in this roster that doesn't have a purpose, that's just sitting there and is not going to move unless the team moves him themselves. So, finally, we're going to conclude this episode today with our review of what may have been a blockbuster trade between the New York Knicks and the Los Angeles Clippers. Now, Connor, we've been hearing, all Knicks fans, we've been hearing talks of Paul George. And we've been hearing talks of the big star player that the Knicks could potentially bring in. And frankly, it's, to me, looking most unlikely that they'll land a player of that caliber. But there were some heated up talks in the past couple weeks between the Knicks and the Clippers. And there was a trade between LA and New York that was leaked, in which the Knicks ultimately declined. Now, that trade involved RJ Barrett, it involved Quentin Grimes, and it involved some first-round picks in exchange for Paul George. Now, do you remember the exact details of that trade, and would you be able to read the exact details of that trade?
Yeah, I think I remember it. I don't know exactly when the picks were, but I know they're 3 first-round picks, RJ Barrett, and then I think it's Quentin Grimes as well.
Right, that's kind of what I was thinking right there. So, to me, this brings up a big question. We know the Knicks declined that trade, and let me get this out of the way by asking you this question. Would you do that deal, yes or no? Just simple, would you do that exact deal for Paul George, yes or no?
No.
Okay, got it. And I'm right there with you. I think 99.9% of Knicks fans are right there with you as well. Here's my question. RJ Barrett was in that deal. And I know for a lot of Knicks fans, seeing as how RJ Barrett has been a Knick for 4 years, is signed to a long-term extension, really developed and played some of his best basketball of his career in the playoffs last year. Seeing as how all of those things are our current reality, who, if anyone, would you be willing to deal RJ Barrett in return for?
Wait, so you're talking about trading RJ Barrett to get someone back? Or...
Yes.
Okay, so not Paul George.
Who are the players you'd be willing to trade RJ Barrett for? And is Paul George on that list? Is there a deal in which the Knicks could give up RJ to the Clippers for Paul George, and you would say yes?
Personally, no. I mean, I'm not trading RJ for Paul George. Just the age difference alone and the injuries. You know what you're going to get with RJ. Paul George, hell, he might sit half the year. So definitely not Paul George. And honestly, I'm not... RJ is a young star who I really think could take this next year, could really be that leap in year where he's averaging 22 points on good shooting. So I definitely want to keep him. And the only price I would take back is another young star. Like, you got to give me someone that's under 27 and is just as good as RJ Barrett. I don't know who that would be. And honestly, I don't really see a situation where the Knicks should trade RJ because, like we talked about, homegrown players, RJ is kind of like that staple. Like, he's the centerpiece of the homegrown. So I think the Knicks just got to keep him. And I want RJ to be a Knick for life. That's my personal opinion. I do not want to see him leave. And at this moment, I don't want to trade him for really anything. But I guess, yeah, if someone offered like Jokic or some crazy deal, yeah, I'm taking it. But I know that's not going to happen. And I really think RJ is going to be a Knick for at least a while. At least a long time.
Yeah, I think I'm in that same boat with you in that likely RJ is going to be a Knick for a long time. For me, there's a few players I'd give him up for. I think, obviously, the top 5 players in the game, the top 10 players in the game, no-brainer, you do that. But as you mentioned, it's not going to happen. And the reason I brought up that question is it may not be of the belief that we have. But there are Knicks fans out there that believe that trading RJ Barrett could net us a proven superstar, which I don't disagree with that, but they believe it's worth giving up on RJ now. And for a guy like Paul George, who's one of the most realistic candidates to get moved here, no, because Paul George is 33. The best you're going to get from him is now, and he hasn't played more than 56 games in a regular season in the past 4 years. RJ, you said you know what you're getting from him. You know the baseline of what you're getting from him, and that's last year. But I can't imagine that his numbers are going to be worse than they were last year, not to say they were terrible. But I just think he has so much more room to grow, and he's capable of being a 23, 24 point per game player if he just slightly gets more consistent shooting. And he's so incredibly young still. He's only 22. So to me, RJ Barrett is part of the solution, and as is Immanuel Quickley, which I believe they should extend. Hopefully they get that done, and hopefully they can get Evan Fournier's contract off the books, which will help them re-sign quickly, build around RJ, and potentially find an Obi Toppin replacement. So a lot of things we talked about today, and we'll see how the rest of the week goes. We'll see how the rest of the offseason goes, and I'd imagine the New York Knicks are not finished making moves, and I will be extremely excited and interested, as will Connor, in seeing what New York does next. And throughout the whole process, the Knicks Pod will be right here delivering all the news, opinion, and Knicks content that you need to get you through the Knicks offseason and head in to the Knicks regular season. But that'll be about it for now. We'll talk more later this week. And as always, folks, I'm Josh Byrne.
I'm Connor Thompson.
And you've been listening to the Knicks Pod.
We are the New York Knicks. We are the New York Knicks. They go New